Hello, good morning to everyone. First of all, thank you very, very much for making your time this morning to be part of this webinar organized by TRCL in celebration of Temenggung 1820th anniversary and supported by the Hong Kong Economic Trade Office in Singapore. We have guests starting from Singapore, Malaysia, and from Hong Kong who have keyed in. So welcome to Singapore, although remotely. Before we begin, just a quick summary on as to what this series of webinars and what is today's event about. Today marks the second anniversary of Temenggung 1820. We are two black and white colonial houses, historical heritage houses up here in the hills in Singapore. And for the past 2 years, we have been running and functioning as an art center in which we have two focus. One is bridging borders, which is about building cross-cultural relationships, and the other one is building communities, which is about arts and wellness and healings. In our mission of bridging borders, we have two webinars supported by the Hong Kong Economic Trade Office today. The first one this morning from 10:35 to about 11:45, 11:50, looks at a topic called the Healing Fountain, which I'll share a bit about later. And the second one, Red Pill, Blue Pill, starts at 2 p.m. to 3:15 p.m. Both these webinars, working with the Hong Kong Economic Trade Office and with our guests from Hong Kong, grew up from an inspiration in that for the past over 10, 15 years, our organization has been working very closely with our Hong Kong Economic Trade Office and also with various partners and organizations in Hong Kong. And we felt that the relationship between Singapore and Hong Kong, with so much similarities and yet subtle differences, we can learn a lot from one another, especially during this period when the whole world is still caught up in the public health crisis. And within this public health crisis, the question is, what can we, those of us who are in the arts, culture, and creative industries, what can we as practitioners do? What can we learn? What have we observed? And what is next? And hence the title of this first webinar, The Healing Fountain. For those of you who are familiar with literature, you may recognize that the line comes from a poem by W.H. Auden in memory of W.B. Yeats. It's the last stanza of the poem, and the stanza goes something like this. In the deserts of the heart, let the healing fountain start, and in the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise. This comes at the end of a very long poem meditating on a lot of cultural issues, historical issues, and also the role of the arts and the function of the arts in society. So we are very honored today to have two panelists, one from Singapore and one from Hong Kong, to address us. We have with us Audrey Wong from Singapore. Audrey Wong heads the School of Creative Industries in LaSalle, and she was Singapore's very first arts NMP. And before that, she was co-artistic director of the Substation, and she's a leading writer, a cultural advocate, and also a change maker, and she's at the forefront of a lot of changes in the art scene. From Hong Kong, we're very honored to have Mr. Matthias Wu. Those of you from Hong Kong and who are familiar with the work of Zuni, I think what Mr. Wu does doesn't need any introduction. He has hosted his own program in Hong Kong itself, and Mr. Wu is in a way, we can say, a polymath. He's familiar with theater, multimedia, architecture, urban design, and his work cuts across all disciplinaries. We're truly honored to have both of them with us this morning. But however, before we begin, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the director of the Hong Kong Economic Trade Office in Singapore, Mr. C.T. Wong. Mr. Wong, before coming to Singapore, he was in Hong Kong working with various government bureaus, and he was based also with the Hong Kong ETO in San Francisco. The Hong Kong ETO in Singapore is one of the three representative offices of Hong Kong in Singapore, in the region, in ASEAN region. And the office in Singapore oversees 4 countries, Singapore, Laos, Vietnam, and India, and its aim is to build cultural relationships between both countries. So without much further ado, Mr. C.T. Wong.
Dear friends in Singapore and dear friends in Hong Kong, we are very happy to support the RISE company for this, A Tale of Two Cities within a world of this order webinars. The HKT deal, as mentioned by Ming Yan, is one of the 3 offices in the region. We have been supporting arts and cultural exchanges between Hong Kong and Singapore since our office was established in the 1990s. In the past, we have worked with the RISE company to bring a number of artists from Hong Kong to the audience in Singapore. While right now physical exchanges are not possible due to the threats of the COVID-19, we will continue to support other ways to bring artists in both cities together, and this webinars will be a very good way to start. To assist the arts and cultural sectors to tackle the difficulties arising from COVID-19 in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong SA government allocated 27 million Singapore dollars for launching an arts and cultural sector subsidy scheme to support arts organization, freelance arts worker in Hong Kong to deal with all the difficulties. The subsidies has been dispersed to our venue partners, to our grantees, and 9 major performing arts groups. These arts groups will make use of the subsidy to pay for the salary of the staff, contractors, and freelance workers as much as possible. In addition, we have also entrusted the Hong Kong Arts Development Council, we call it HKADC, to disperse subsidies under the support scheme for arts and cultural sectors as well. Funding will be released to HKADC grantees as well as HKADC funded or commissioned projects grantees. We will continue to look for ways to support our arts and cultural sectors. For the morning session, both Ms. Wong and Mr. Wu are very distinguished artists. I look forward very much to learning their insights regarding the development of arts and culture under the new normal. So thanks again for the RISE company in organizing this event, and we are all very eager to learn the insights from our guests in both Singapore and Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. C.T. Wong, for your address and also for the support of the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office in Singapore for this webinar. As Mr. C.T. Wong has mentioned, movement and travel is restricted, but that does not mean that cross-cultural relationships, learning from one another, despite not being able to travel, cannot happen, and continuous exchange cannot happen, and hence the impetus for these webinars. So without much further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Matthias Wu from Zuni from Hong Kong. Mr. Matthias Wu, please.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone from Hong Kong and Singapore. I'm very glad and honored to participate in this event. And what can I say? I mean, it is kind of a shock. I think it's for everyone in the art world, I mean, around the whole world, that this could be happen. It's more dramatic than anything we can imagine. So what next? So maybe I would like to brainstorm and share some of my observations during the last few months. As you know, in Hong Kong, we have last year also is a very kind of dramatic year for Hong Kong. And then we don't even expect after that kind of dramatic event, there's another dramatic event happen after that. So, and as an artist, usually we will pick up those materials, reflect, and then we will create a work. Maybe a theater work, maybe a painting, maybe to write a story, to write a novel about what happened. But now, because of the technology, everything is moving so quick in a kind of second scale. I mean, we cannot really reflect because we have to reflect now. And if you look at YouTube, if you look at all the new technology, the impact of technology are even more immersive because we keep a lot of our attention to the screen. And especially for cities like Hong Kong and Singapore, we are all technically engaged. We have very good networking. I mean, networking means we have all the Wi-Fi, the phone, and then a network, the web, you know, so we can really easy to do international Zoom call. And in terms of the uniqueness of Hong Kong and Singapore, in terms of culture, we are always acting like a bridge of the two cultures, the East and the West. And after this whole incident, what can artists do in these two cities? Because for the last 10 years, we all know we are so obsessed with events and numbers, tourists. Artists is always asked to do events that can attract tourists, that can have sensation. But what do we need after this? I think there are two things I would like we all to think about. One is about body, because we only talk about vaccine, but do we talk about should we live in a more healthy way, understand our body more so we can practice a better practice of breathing. So this is a very Asian tradition, because Asian tradition is more about the prevention of disease rather than to cure the disease, because disease is always with us. The most important thing is how we can build a stronger body. So this is one thing that I think artists or performing artists could contribute, is how we live a healthy artist life. I mean, for example, my observation, because I work a lot with a lot of traditional Kun opera artists in China and also Asian artists in China, I observe they live in a very healthy way. They live in a very old. I mean, the older they get, I mean, the stronger they are. There's the practice of Asian performing arts. That is a very kind of interesting that we should observe and studies. And secondly, could we develop a better kind of education system that can educate our kids to understand their body, rather than to learn to make money, because make money creates stress, and then create stress, you need to do yoga to release the stress. You know? So I think in terms of education, how we need to introduce more about educating our kids, understand their body, live more healthy so that they are stronger to fight any virus will come to us. Okay, so this is one thing about body. Second is about technology. So I think technology play a very important role this time to keep people connected, to keep people have a job, or to keep people to imagine, to explore that they never explore. So like YouTube, people spend more time in YouTube. And when you look at YouTube, it's kind of very interesting. You can learn from YouTube for anything from carpenter to food making, anything. You can find anything in YouTube. And people can connect like this Zoom call. And so maybe in the future, should we travel less? Should we communicate more in a different way? Should we know ways to manage carbon footprint? Should we less rely on, should we more generate local tourists, local rather than global tourists, which is somehow I think is a kind of very crazy that people travel that intensively. I think it doesn't make sense. All kind of global roaming thing and that kind of, how can we use technology in a good way? And how artists can use technology in a more interesting way to interact with people. Or theater, where I come from, theater is about technology, because for example, the invention of electricity changed theater. The invention of microphone changed theater. I think the invention of video projection, of computer lighting, or a lot of things really changed theater. And how can we deal with that? I think what we are doing, what we should do maybe in the future, maybe what Singapore and Hong Kong should collaborate is how can we explore an Asian way to invent an Asian tradition of understanding the body, and how we can reinvent the concept of technology, not just for sensation, not just for making money, but for making sense, for making peace, for making more a kind of a pluralistic society that a lot of artists would like to see. So this is what I would like to say. I hope this is, but I hope this is okay. Huh?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wu.
Am I overrun?
No, I think Mr. Wu, we can elaborate more later on the points that you have mentioned. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Wu. In fact, we would like to hear more, but I'm glad you stopped there because I need to process everything you said. You have said many powerful things. So for a very quick sum up, I think one important thing Mr. Wu has mentioned that the dramatic events have happened in Hong Kong last year, this year, and he mentioned a word about reflecting. And it's interesting to know what he has mentioned, that with technology, you have to reflect now. The presence of being and the now. And he has also mentioned two things about the focus on the body, how we as cultural practitioners look at the body, looking at the body in sense of leading a healthy life. And he gave the example of Kun Opera and Kun Opera practitioners, a very good reminder for us. And about prevention, the Asian concept of health rather than what you call addressing a problem, we should prevent it before we start. And you talk about technology, and Mr. Wu used a very interesting word. He used, is there an Asian way of using technology to make sense and purpose rather than making money? Rather reminiscent of what Junichiro Tanizaki had mentioned in his book In Praise of Shadows, when he talked about a lot of technology coming from the West, but if the Japanese had invented or the Asians had invented the radio, would there be a different way of looking at things? So I think these are interesting food for thought, which we can elaborate on later. And to bear in mind, for those of you who want to ask questions, you can, there's a Q&A. Please type your questions in your Q&A and we can field it. So moving from Mr. Wu, we'll come back to Mr. Wu. We'll come back to some of your points again to elaborate again. I'd like to now invite Ms. Audrey Wong from Singapore to share with us her insights.
Okay, hello. Thank you to the Rice Company for the invitation. Thank you, Ming Yan. And thanks to the Hong Kong Trade Office as well for supporting this. Matthias has made some really interesting points, about like body technology and how do we still take care of ourselves and our body and our relationship with the world in this highly technologized society. I'm going to talk from the Singapore perspective of some recent developments, and I do have some slides because I don't want to assume that everybody is familiar with what's going on in Singapore. Right, so let me see how I can do this. Right, okay. Hope you can see the screen. So I'll talk about three things and then conclude with some thoughts. So three things, I'll start with COVID-19 and the impacts on the arts in Singapore and what's been done to help the arts sector. I'll put that in the context of what Singapore is like and how we tend to emphasize hardware over software, and software, which is that the human aspects of life, the emotional, psychological, social well-being, all those factors are becoming more prominent today as well, and how Singapore is trying to deal with both sides, the hardware and the software. Then recently we had our general elections just last week, which was quite a watershed. And I think that that's also shaped how artists are starting to think about what's our role in wider society. And then I will end with some thoughts. Okay, so to start with COVID-19 on the arts and cultural and creative sectors. So this is a screenshot from a website called ilostmygig.sg, one of many similar websites around the world where creative professionals can actually put in like how they've been affected, so how much income has been lost, and put some details about themselves. And the latest tally for Singapore is that $30 million in lost income. So that's quite significant for a small country. The National Arts Council quickly swung into action actually when after COVID hit and after the Singapore government announced measures to help people to get through this crisis. So the Arts Council did a quick survey as well among artists and the arts community. And generally, everybody recognized that the biggest impact of COVID-19 would be on the freelancers or the self-employed people in Singapore. And there's it's estimated that there's as many as 50,000 people freelancing, and they're quite a significant, of course, significant community within the arts and creative sector, and they would be the ones hardest hit. So some stats from the NEC showed that 91% of freelancers had project cancellations and 85% had projects postponed. So a lot of our major events also got postponed. So theaters were closed, no shows were going on. The Singapore International Festival of Arts was cancelled for this year, and we were all scrambling to just to get by. All right. So very quickly, the government came up with 3 packages of help: the resilience budget, solidarity budget, and the fortitude budget. Yeah, and alongside this, there was also money allocated to the Ministry of Community, Culture and Youth for the arts sector. So the National Arts Council quickly came out with some schemes to support artists, as well as the freelance artists who were affected by loss of income and jobs. There were new grants, which were slightly controversial, but I won't go into that. And also, importantly, the job support scheme. So one of the primary, in a way, the primary support that was felt to be most important was really helping people to keep their jobs. So the major grant companies, a lot of companies that are regularly supported by the Arts Council, they also had support to help them keep their staff on the payroll. So what have we learned from all of this? I think generally overall, I mean, throughout for everybody affected by the pandemic, there's been a sense of precarity. You know, I mean, it is existential because you really don't know if you would get sick, right? You don't know if that person you meet is sick and is going to pass the virus to you. You don't know what would be the outcome if you do get sick and what's going to happen to your family, etc. So overall, there's a sense of precarity, but work-wise in the arts, definitely a strong sense of precarity, and it, I think we haven't quite recovered from that yet, because we can't even plan for next year. We don't know what it's going to be like. How can we plan to produce a new show when we really don't know if we can actually even all be in the theater again, right? The other thing we've also found out was that, I mean, or rather probably given we were much more made aware of this, is that is a number of interesting practices that were going on in the creative sectors. For instance, that sometimes people in their contracts did not have a compensation clause. So when the project got cancelled, they didn't get anything, even though they might have already done some work on the project. And this is across the board, whether you are a creative artist, or whether you are a technical personnel or production manager. We found that this was going on. And number of people didn't receive compensation, quite a lot of people, and people just didn't think that the worst would happen and they might need compensation. So we realized that actually there was a need for us to be much more aware about what agreements we're entering into. On the positive side, very quickly there was a lot of ground out support groups. There was advocacy. People were quickly talking to government bodies about, don't forget particularly the freelance community. Don't forget that we are greatly impacted, and we have families as well. We have mortgages, etc. So Facebook groups came about, such as the SG COVID-19 support group for creative and cultural professionals. And then there's a Facebook group for the arts community called ArtsCom. And arising from what we've all been going through in this crisis, the ArtsCom has started a small working group to draw up a set of good practices in theatre. So they wanted to look at how we can improve in things like, as I mentioned before, contracts, in things like fair treatment of people you hire, health and safety, in the workplace, things like that. So they started to work on that, and the plan is to come out with a working paper and have people kind of sign on and agree that they would abide by a certain code of fair practice. So we're getting together in a way to try to help improve the sector, as well as to provide resources for people who are struggling. So that's what's happened with COVID and the arts. So the second part, I want to talk about how, as I mentioned, how Singapore tends to be really good at doing the hardware. We're great at like building our city, you know, we're great at urban planning, we're great at the economic planning, you know, all of that. But we are sometimes we're not so good perhaps at looking at the softer aspects of life. So when the circuit breaker happened, which was our version of the lockdown, when everybody was encouraged to stay at home, for instance, and non-essential services like retail and restaurants were closed. One of the services that was not open was actually mental wellness and mental health services. So people were saying, well, why are these kinds of services labeled non-essential? You know, isn't this a time when people need this more than ever? So after a lot of you know, a lot of professionals started to talk about it, and there was quite a lot of publicity, they psychological treatments, mental well-being was reinstated as essential. But that shows kind of like the divide, you know, in terms of our Singaporean mentality, that there is the, you know, you take care of the rice bowl and then you take care of your mental well-being or your psychological well-being. So the arts, though, has always been very aware, and I think increasingly more, you see that a lot more in Singapore, about that need to care for ourselves, to care for those around us, and to take time out for ourselves, because artists tend to also take on a lot of projects. We work really hard, and people are realizing that self-care is also very important, because if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others. So you're seeing also that, you know, the National Gallery and the museums, they're looking at programs that could also help people to slow down a bit, relax a bit, think about where you are, think about um, your relationship with the world around you. An ongoing project by T-Works, which is formerly Theatre Works, is a project called CARE, where they are creating a fund to support artists and other people working in the social sector who are taking care of the gaps in society, taking care of the people whose needs are insufficiently met by either the government or the private sector. So one of the big issues in Singapore during the COVID-19 outbreak is the outbreaks in the migrant worker dorms. Because we have tens of thousands of migrant workers who are living, you know, like 10 or 12 people to a room in these purpose-built dormitories. And of course, the virus, you know, was transmitted very, very rapidly, and it's still going on now. So this was, again, a huge controversy, and this was something that most of us cared quite strongly about, that can we also take care of this community, which is actually very visible, but also very hidden. Third thing I want to talk about is the general elections. So with all that, you know, that all this, you know, of course, everybody is thinking, okay, Singapore, how is the government dealing with the pandemic? Is it dealing with it well or not? And in many ways, you know, the government's dealt with it really well. We have a very good healthcare system. Excuse me. But in cases like the migrant worker dormitories, definitely we weren't doing well there at all. So in the midst of all this, the election was called, and it was watershed, with the opposition taking 10 seats in the parliament, which is, well, is unprecedented for a very long time. And this actually people realized that this revealed a number of things that were going on in society. One was that people are not afraid to speak up, and technology has also enabled that. People are you know, because there were no political rallies, and people couldn't really meet the candidates face to face, a lot of campaigning happened online. So a lot of our access to information about the different parties and politicians was online. Um, so, and that actually also gave the opposition parties a great chance to show people who they were, what they stood for, and people could see and have a more have a more, in a way, more familiar with these candidates compared to the past, I think. And it's also been recognized in the aftermath that that part of this result was because of the younger generation, those, you know, in the 20s and 30s, um, who quite clearly were voting to see more alternative voices in parliament. And they are talking to themselves, and sometimes they're talking to themselves and not to the older generation. And we may also be seeing different views, older generation versus younger generation. The young people, they are very quickly creating memes, right, online. They you know, this is a meme that went around between an opposition party candidate and our deputy prime minister from the ruling party, who quite famously was a little bit incoherent on nomination day when he was presenting his team for his constituency. So people quickly created all these memes, and some of them were really clever, really witty. They commented on politics, on social developments, um, and they have, and it's quite clear that this generation has their own values and how what they see is important. And living life well is important, and they're feeling very stressed as well, because, you know, in Singapore it's such a competitive environment, and there's such a focus on getting ahead in your careers, and be having this material well-being. But people are feeling that, in a way, that divide between pursuit of material well-being versus the pursuit of other things that are more meaningful in your life. So some thoughts. Where does that put us now? I think, as I've mentioned, we are seeing that there is actually the younger generation are expressing themselves in a way that perhaps is a bit different, is different from the older generation. And in some cases, their world of communication may not be intersecting, right? So one of the things that was going around online during the election period was boomers versus zoomers. So the young people are saying, oh, this candidate sounds like a boomer, meaning that I cannot relate to this person because, you know, the way he behaves and talks is too much like my dad. It's too old. In Singapore also, yours is much more diverse. So you have a whole lot of views, many different ideological influences from the left to the right. And also because people are so vocal, there is a concern that perhaps people may not be listening to each other. Right. Added to this is that stress of precarity, whether it's about your health, or whether it's about your finances. Can you support your family, or can you find a job? Especially now, in the long term, you know, what kind of job is available for you? And this is something that the younger generation will now be concerned about. What kind of job is out there for me? What should I do with my life in the long term? So is that time for a reset, for us to reset our priorities and to start taking care of the software a little more? How do we do that? How do we do both taking care of the hardware and the software? And the arts has been well supported during this period, or, you know, fairly well supported during this period, with grants and with, you know, Arts Council, you know, listening to the artists, etc. But we also think that perhaps that is because the arts, in a way, has been instrumentalized. We see we see this arts being used for its economic benefits, arts being used, you know, because it can help you to achieve other goals, such as you use the art to teach people, or you use the arts to give relief to people who are sick, or you know, to work with the elderly, to achieve other goals, right? So that's the kind of art that's being prioritized. But what about art for art's sake? You know, what is the use of art for art's sake? And I think we need to argue for the value of the aesthetics of art, for art in itself, and not art as being used to achieve other economic, tourist goals or social goals. And this is also on us, on the arts community as well. How do we get into those big conversations about society, about governance, about economics, about future development of Singapore? How do we get intertwined into other national conversations of this nature? Does it mean we have to be a lot more collaborative with other sectors? Does it mean that we play a part in also educating younger people who are so vocal now about things like democracy, about things like what is governance, how about using your vote wisely, about critical thinking, thinking through social issues, cultural issues. There is now also, just recently, a small group of artists that have come together and are saying, we really want to do that. We really want to go and, you know, see, as artists, can we do something to kickstart and have people engaged in critical conversations about who we are and where we're going. So I think there will be a lot more that the arts community will be doing in terms of connecting between the arts world and wider social issues. We're still figuring out how we're going to do that and who we should work with. But I think, yeah, exciting times ahead if we get through the pandemic. So we are in this state of being now where, on the one hand, right, there's so much, people are really thinking, okay, what can I do? And how can I move my practice, you know, out of the crisis or beyond the crisis, right? And on the other hand, there's this great feeling of insecurity and precarity. So I think I'll stop there. And yeah, happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey, for that wonderful sharing and for giving a wonderful, succinct summing up of the entire situation in Singapore, and for those of us in the arts in very brief and concise. And I think several things that you have mentioned do have sympathy, or they resonate in sympathy with some things which Matthias had mentioned. You talked about living life meaningfully, or finding a more meaningful way to live from your conversation. And you mentioned the word reset. You talk about instrumentalization of the arts, things which in a way are related to or bear some relevance to what Matthias has mentioned. And I think that there are certain things you both have talked about, which we can, I'll be glad to hear actually both each of your views on each other's topics of presentations. But before that, we have two questions, one from Matthias and one for Audrey. I'll ask the question for Matthias first, and then I would also like to ask Audrey to elaborate on that, because one question is pertaining to Hong Kong, one pertaining to Singapore, but I think it'd be great to hear both your views on this. So I'll ask the first question. The first question is to Matthias, but after that, Audrey, I'll be glad to hear your answer to that in a Singapore context. And the question is this: Hi, Mr. Wu. It is very interesting you mentioned about training our body and mind. How do you see this aspect being introduced into the curriculum in education in Hong Kong? Once again, hi, Mr. Wu. It is very interesting you mentioned about training our body and mind. How do you see this aspect being introduced into the curriculum in education in Hong Kong? So Matthias, perhaps you answer first, and then I'd like to hear Audrey's, because Audrey's an educator, similar in Singapore. Thank you.
I think not just for Hong Kong. I think it's for the whole world. I would suggest first stop teaching STEAM or STEM. I think it's a waste of resources because they're teaching kids how to use gadgets rather than understand themselves. I think what we need to teach is body. What body means is how you breathe, how you observe yourself, how you develop your sensitivity, and then how you can, based on your sensitivity, to understand what you could do. I mean, that's more important than manipulate by technology. I think nowadays technology is too overwhelming, especially for young people. They think everything is so easy, so they can really click like or unlike. They can make a decision so quick by like or unlike something, or they could just stop and fast forward when they listen to music, when they watch video. They can really just do whatever they want to do. I mean, it's too easy. I think that the situation now we are facing is everything is so easy. And suddenly everything is not easy anymore because we are not allowed to go to anywhere we like anymore. But we still, I think the curriculum, first to start with breathing, how we breathe, how we understand the body, the technology of body, how our body function. I think we should teach that in a very younger age. So when young people grow up, when they understand themselves, then he know how to communicate or use technology in a more humane way. What's happening now is people are sitting, looking at the screen, and then we are just become an object. We never go out, or we never really activate. I think this pandemic thing really kind of a wake-up call for us. So we know that going outside is so precious. Touching people is so precious. And then there's also one thing that there's always, we need to learn that there's a price to pay. I mean, when we over-consume, when we overdone a lot of things, there's something we come back, you know. So I would say a curriculum, not just for Hong Kong, but for the world. But I think for Hong Kong, it's true because Hong Kong is too much like a shopping consumerism or tourism culture is so overwhelming. And we use gadgets, but we never understand how gadgets relate to us. So we need to learn about the body, breathing, how we walk, how we stand. I mean, those basic simple things, because I do a lot of workshop with kids in Hong Kong, and I observe that they don't even know how to stand. You know, they don't even know how to breathe. They don't even know how to observe their breathing. And they are always kind of, now, I mean, it's a kind of symptom that people just watching their phone and kind of manipulate by their phone. I think even to teach how to, not human relation, phone and human relation, we should be taught at school as well. And why art makes sense is, I think the fundamental of art is about the five senses. No matter it's visual art or performing arts, it's all about the five senses. And the reason why we learn art is not to make money. But the problem is, the concept of art are being changed last 10 years. Art becomes so important. We only talk about the dollar signs of art rather than talking about the basic of art, which is the five senses. I think this is what, not just Hong Kong, but Hong Kong could be an example. Maybe we can join hands with Singapore and do something together on this to engage young people by arts, not to make money, but to make sense of themselves.
Thank you very much, Matthias, for the sharing and for actually contextualizing it. You put it, your views, your idea, your focus back on the basics of the body, on breath, the simple action of standing, walking, and even sitting, the basic principles which we sometimes often forget. And you have contextualized it within the culture of Hong Kong, which is shopping, as you mentioned, overwhelming consumerism. And you also mentioned about humanizing technology. And also a reminder that, yes, one thing about this pandemic that's brought about is that suddenly things are actually not that easy. We can't touch, we can't use our five senses fully, which of course gives a challenge. So now, Audrey, you know, would you like to respond to this question also, and also to what Matthias has mentioned?
Yeah, I really liked what Matthias said, you know, and I absolutely agree. Like we're so familiar with the technology, and you know, our children are so familiar. They're using a gadget, you know, from the time they can walk, right? But you know, you're holding a gadget in your hand. There is a physical relationship as well, right? And how do you're interfacing with the gadget and the screen, and that is part of our real life now. But we are not properly taught, you know, what is that relationship and how do we deal with that relationship. I think another dimension, if you think about education of young people as well, I agree, it's not just about teaching people how to use the technology, but understanding and fully understanding what it is and what it means. For instance, I teach in an art school, right? And you know, we have students that are doing filmmaking, animation, design, etc. Software is always changing. There's always a few years later, a new program will come on the market, and everybody has to learn that new program because everyone is using it, right? So you're constantly having to learn a new program. But you know, why do you use the program for? In the case of animation or film, you're using it to tell stories, right? So what is the core skill? What is the core area of knowledge? It's about storytelling. It's about storytelling, which is also a very human thing. And shouldn't the emphasis be on that rather than learning how to, you know, use a particular software? So that's something that I think at LaSalle we try to put into our philosophy, that is about storytelling. It's about understanding these bigger things and not just about the software. Of course, you know, a lot of young people that's just so used to that technological solution, right? I click a button and it solves things for me. So the other dimension, apart from understanding body, I think is also understanding that body and mind relationship. I think one of the areas that we have somewhat neglected in education is the emotional development of young people and children. You know, which is, you know, teaching people how do you understand what you're feeling and how do you cope with how you're feeling. And that helps to build resilience. That helps people to also to really understand how to relate to each other as well. And I actually see that as, in a way, being even more important now. If the new normal is that we spend most of our time at home, we spend a lot of time on the screen, if the teaching environment is not physical classroom, but part of it is online, people are going to be cut off from each other, right? So I think understanding, you know, like your emotional relationship with your body is also very important. And that's not in the curriculum in any school that I know of. How do we do it? I'm not really sure, but it's something we should deal with, because as I've said, you know, there's you know, also people are just expressing themselves online in many different ways, and sometimes with, as we say, no filter, right? And that actually can create a lot of conflict. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Audrey, for the sharing. I think, yeah, that's the word, no filter, a very common term that has cropped up. Matthias, I don't know if we have a similar phrase in Hong Kong, but no filter means you just act without thinking or without mindfulness, the word that comes out. But I think, thanks, Audrey, you know, I think for your insights on how, about thinking about how one uses technology and the thinking behind that. And if really moving ahead, movement is going to be restricted and context is going to be restricted, then that's something, our relationship with our own body becomes more and more important. Now, before we go there into detail and how perhaps coming up from here, you know, both your views from Hong Kong and Singapore can work together on this, we have a second question. The second question deals with livelihoods, and I think it's something that both of you have brought up. The second question is for Audrey, but I'd like to also, I think, invite Matthias to respond to it after Audrey has responded. The question deals with something that just happened very recently, as of yesterday, or the day before, and it's to do with jobs, and it goes this way. Hi, Audrey. It is very sad to hear that Resorts World Sentosa's retrenchment of 2,000 employees. Half of the entertainment department has been dissolved. How do you see the art scene in Singapore in the future? Once again, hi Audrey. It's very sad to hear that Resort World Sentosa's retrenchment of 2,000 employees. Half of the entertainment department has been dissolved. How do you see the art scene in Singapore in the future? Before I invite Audrey to answer the question, just a background for those of you who are listening in from Hong Kong. RWS, or Resort World Sentosa, has a very large entertainment department, and for a lot of students, whether from the polys or uni or any graduate from the arts management, RWS was a very important place to provide jobs and employment for arts and arts management or theatre tech training graduates. So this retrenchment of 2,000 employees and half of its entertainment does have a big impact on livelihoods for those of us who are in the arts. So Audrey, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, actually, this was actually quite a shock when a news came out, I think a couple of days ago, you know. But again, I mean, the arts is not the only sector that's been decimated. I think you're seeing that there are companies who are, you know, going under in many areas. Many restaurants have really gone under. And with the recession looming, we can anticipate that there will be more job losses across the board. Of course, Resorts World is very much reliant on tourists, right? And without tourism, it automatically, you know, it's in trouble. So this is a question that faces any country that relies a lot on tourists, and Hong Kong as well, you know, because Matthias, you did mention that that it is, you know, it does look at tourists as a source of revenue. So it's something that will happen across the board. It is very sad. And how do I think the arts scene will recover, or can it recover? I have to say I don't have the answers. I'm not really sure. As I've mentioned, I know that some people are actually taking this time to think about, with my skills that I have from working in the arts, what else can I do? How can I transform my practice? So there are some artists that are looking at that. So, you know, doing something that is more digital perhaps, or but then again, there's a question of how do you monetize something that goes on a digital platform and make a living from that. So there are people who are looking to innovate. And sadly, what's also happening is that people are leaving the arts. There are some ground-up surveys that has shown that people in the arts and creative professions are seriously thinking about leaving the sector and just getting a job somewhere else. We hope that if things recover, they will come back to the arts, but it's not a guarantee. So yes, there will be a talent drain. But as you know, I do feel that artists are resilient, and you know, and people will continue to make art no matter what. Maybe we will have a smaller art sector in Singapore, and certainly I think for the medium term we will need a lot of government support to keep the arts afloat, which also means that we have to continue to advocate to government that the arts is important, and that support needs to continue.
Thank you, Audrey, for the summary. Yes, in Singapore, the situation, as you have mentioned, it is uncertain. The people either rethinking how they want to practice their art, or looking for something else. And will there be, as you said, a talent drain, a drain from the arts? That's something that's quite worrisome. And ultimately, how does one look at the arts and practices in Singapore? I think you mentioned about the instrumentalization of the arts, and Matthias spoke about the same thing too. That's something that we have to relook at our practice. Matthias, what is the situation like in Hong Kong in terms of jobs and I think they've just shut down Disneyland Hong Kong again temporarily. So would you like to share with us a perspective on Hong Kong?
I think in Hong Kong, art is always I mean, it's just events. We have a lot of arts events, but our government or our society don't really support artists, especially local artists. Like the government or everywhere in the world, I think in Singapore, I mean, they put money in arts event, and then most of the money go to non-locals. So like most of the money we spend is on Western classical high arts, like most of the festival program, most of the money. So I think artists in Hong Kong used to living in an uncertain or I won't say underprivileged, but look at the West Kowloon Cultural District. There's not many Hong Kong, I mean, it's not built for Hong Kong people. I don't know where it built for, they said it built for tourists. And doing things for tourists is an excuse to make things more shallow. So they ask you to be more entertaining, more easy to understand. And I don't really understand what easy to understand mean, because you understand or you don't understand. But sometimes a lot of government people or business people only telling you, artists, you to do something that people can understand, Then I would say, you talk about people, how many people, Because artists are doing things for their own. And I think art is more like a self-practice rather than a job. So I think artists will find a way to survive. And I think government support is important. I would like to say, why government support doctors, teachers, but not artists? Why can't a hospital have artists and doctors work together on mind and body? Why can't artists go to schools and teach and work with kids on arts and teachers and be more interactive rather than just teaching, Because what the norm is, it's always about money making. But I think money making is not a crime. Money making is part of it, not all of it. I think we should remind ourselves that art is not just for money. Art is for us. Art is for human beings. And human being means you find a means to understand yourself and to express yourself. So I think the Hong Kong situation is there's a lot of concern. A government put in money. I think government is supportive, in their own way. But I think in the long term, I would suggest we do something small. We have smaller venues. We don't need to big venues. We have the concept of coffee shop or tea house. I think in Singapore is a perfect setting with all the well-preserved historical site. Can it be converted into a lot of small and mini tea house cafe? Can we use the concept of a boutique cafe or artists have poetry readings, storytelling, a venue for the kids? There's so many kind of imagination that we could do. I think do things small. I think we can not go back to doing things big anymore. I think in the next 5 or 10 years, I don't think it will go back to that norm. But what we should do is how we can create something small, and we can and allow artists to experiment, to express themselves in a less economical stress way, because there's a lot of pressure telling you have to make a lot of money, and you have to be a YouTuber that have millions of likes. That's another world, not for artists. I mean, if you look at all the KOL in the world, for example, like BTS, so popular, everyone knows BTS. But do you remember any one song, BTS? Beatles, I know, yesterday. I mean, you can name a lot of songs, but BTS, do you remember any songs of it? It's just a norm, it's just a phenomenon. It's something that people just follow on. But talking about a younger generation for artists, I think what the government should do is to do better planning of the city by creating more space for arts, not just for hospital, not just for, and it should be more integrative. Like the housing estate in Singapore, all the housing estate in Singapore, if they build every Singapore housing estate already built in arts space there, artists will go there and do something with the community. and then it will create something very unique, you know. And I remember a few years ago when I visited Seoul, and I met with the mayor who just passed away. I was very sad, and then he did something very interesting. Is he had this policy that every district should develop an art center, community art center in 6 months. Don't build, just convert. And each center no need to be standardized. This center have a different size and need to be working with the community. I think this idea is cool, and it's less expensive. I mean, the Western way, I mean, is a kind of very old-fashioned. The norm of building big venues or being big events is a kind of very 70s or 80s ideas. And I think we should, and like in Hong Kong also have a very unique setting, is because we have a lot of countryside. We only use 5% of our land, 5%. That's why Hong Kong real estate is so expensive, because we have 90%. I'm in the countryside. I mean, there's so many things we could do. We could do green art, we could do farming, we could do a camping, we could do green living, a lot of things. I mean, this is the moment that artists will bring out their imagination, and then government should be more open. Not, I mean, we will the whole rigid tender process or fee bidding and that kind of rigid thing. Let it go, let it be, and then we do something cool and do something fun. And there's something I think Singapore and Hong Kong could work together on. We have very similar cultural background. We are very bilingual, and we are also multilingual. We have our elite, our social elite are all connected of both sides. I know a lot of people who have 2 homes in Singapore. So it's more easy to work together on this. And we all know that we have to do something different now. But what kind of different? I think artists should offer that, should offer the answer.
Okay, yeah, if I may add to that as well, you know, I think artists do want to work close to the ground and with the communities here in Singapore. I think one of the challenges that we have in working in the housing estates and so on is that there already is that whole government affiliated network of community organizations under the People's Association, which is a statutory board, right? So if you're going in to do any work there, you have to navigate that whole People's Association system, as well as there's also another network of the social service providers. So you have to navigate that whole system, which can be very difficult and very demoralizing. So I think, you know, it's important to try and make it, like you said, streamlined and easier for people to actually do work in the neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you, Matthias and Audrey, I think, for this, and thanks, Matthias, for your sharing of the insight into, you know, Hong Kong. And you're right. In Hong Kong, it's about 90% of your countryside that's, you know, can still be utilized, and there's so many exciting possibilities. And interesting that you mentioned the various areas which you know, Singapore practitioners and Hong Kong practitioners can work together. And I think that's one of the purposes we have this webinar. Matthias, you mentioned earlier on, maybe we should travel less but communicate more. So, you know, sessions like this we can't travel, but we can communicate a lot, and maybe things can develop. Just to add to something you said, Matthias, about hospitals. You know, you mentioned about why can't artists work in hospitals. Actually, in Sengkang, my organization, we're actually doing 2 projects with hospitals. We just finished one quite a massive project in a community hospital here, working with artists. One of them being an ex-offender himself, but is a well-known artist and having done murals in a hospital here. And we're also involved in another project for another hospital end of this year, developing a virtual concert. So it seems that I think in Singapore,
hospital artists work in hospital is not to do decoration. I mean, we should have artist program integrate in the hospital that nurses, doctors, patients can participate.
Actually,
rather than it should be part of the program, and we should not limit to the Western concept of art. We could have like meditation, like calligraphy, a lot of things because somehow when we talk about artists in hospital, artists in shopping mall, it's become just decoration. I'm not talking about that because we are not doing it very well, super well. We already have I'm not talking about decorative thing. I'm talking about something more fundamentals that artists can really participate in the decision-making process rather decoration, rather doing the decoration. I mean, that's also for the artists to learn about some practical issue, because we are always asked to decorate things. We never asked to work together on making decisions. That's why we always end up with comment that our artist is like this, artist is like that. But no, it's not necessary. If we create more chances to let them understand more about how institution works, so like what Audrey said about the community association, blah, blah, it's the same thing in Hong Kong. Then first of all, the government should have the policy that if they really want to include the young people, after the election result, they understand that the old institution doesn't work anymore. You need to establish a new kind of institution that can positively engage the young people. I mean, like one of the questions being asked, the cancel culture. Yes, why is the cancel culture? Because the existing institution created, because what we can do is to cancel each other. We can only dislike each other. We can only do protests. We can never really engage. So I think the existing institution who is holding the power should reflect on this. And I think the Singaporean government is smart enough to reflect about this. But how to do it? It's no longer the old way, no longer the old Lee Kuan Yew way. We have to find a new way to do it, you know, because it is no longer, the ecology is so different now, you know.
Thanks, Matthias. I totally agree with you that when you talked just now about when people build houses or when they build hospitals, artists should be in the equation and not on the afterthought. I totally agree with you on that. And I think moving ahead, I should connect you with this hospital we've been working with, because the CEO of our hospital, himself a surgeon, and also he's a great advocate of art and painters, and he actually started mindfulness practice in the hospital. He is very much looking at how we can incorporate all the very things you spoke about, understanding the body, being present, and all that in his hospital. I should connect you with that, and you can do maybe a Hong Kong Singapore project. Yeah, because the CEO himself paints, loves art, and he's beginning to see how it can be integrated and not just decorative. So it's a very interesting process. I think that's something we can work together on. Now, in regard to the question you mentioned, I think the question on cancel culture, I'll read it out, and I think if both of you could address it in full. The question is, with regards to boomers versus zoomers and the general election results, there have been public sentiments on the rise of cancel culture. How do you think cancel culture may impact the arts? Will this result in less openness to alternative opinions? Once again, how do you think cancel culture may impact the arts? Will this result in less openness to alternative opinions? So I was thinking, Matthias, you already shared some views on that. Maybe I ask Audrey to answer first, and then Matthias, you can both dialogue on it. So Audrey and Matthias.
Yeah, I think cancel culture, okay, it's also emerged because people can make instantaneous responses, you know, on social media, right? And because, you know, nowadays, like, one's fame is also in a way predicated on how popular you are on social media. And as we have seen, you know, that kind of social media fame or internet fame can also have very tragic consequences, as you've seen in Korea, right, with a number of the very popular celebrities actually taking their own lives because of that. So again, there's that very, very real world impact, you know, that very real technology is not a tool that you use, right? It has very real world consequences. There is, again, that back to that impact on the body, you know, because of what you see on the screen, you might do things to your body that are unhealthy, you know, or vice versa. But going back to this question about cancel culture, I think the arts has always been also a forum where alternative points of view can be presented. And they can be presented in a complex way, right? So not just it's either A or B, but the arts also can deal with gray areas, and it can encourage people to look into those gray areas and have a discussion. So that's something that I think the arts is good is good at doing. And certainly in the past in Singapore, we have seen that there are artworks or plays that actually have raised difficult issues, and then people were challenged by it and people have discussions about it. So that's one way to deal with alternative opinions, to have, where people don't agree with each other, right? You can actually facilitate a discussion through art. So again, that's a value of arts. And we just have to really watch, I think, in Singapore, that we do not just fall into the trap or fall into the trend of just following what everyone else is doing, and to be more mindful of how we communicate. So in addition to the skills, um, of understanding, your body, or learning your relationship to nature, in school, maybe in school we also need to think about how do you mediate different opinions, right? How do you accept difference, or how do you acknowledge difference, and how do you have that communication with other parties who may not share your values or your views?
And I think the dilemma is that technology, the existing technology, make us very easy to comment things. So it's very difficult to. So like Twitter, why Twitter is so popular? I mean, it's already reflect the situation of technology that we cannot kind of discuss things in a civilized way. We have to react, and the media and the technology try to pick sensational issue. I mean, sensational statement. So, and then the artist trend is if you are more provocative, you get more attention. So provocative become a norm. If you are more civilized, more gentle, I mean, no one will listen to you. So you become more like a kind of a self-reflection rather than trying to interact with the community. I think that's the difficult part, because and I think the problem is invented by the West, because the media is invented by the West, not by the East, And by the West, they are looking for market, they are looking for manipulation. So they try to simplify things, so make things easier. And you look at the auction market, all the artwork sales good have some kind of a sensational or gimmicks, It's never about, so look at Banksy, it's so popular, it's already tell us the situation of art nowadays is no longer about in-depth thinking or skills or a certain kind of social political context. It's just a gesture. So gesture is so important now. I mean, it's not just cancel culture. It's you have to make a gesture. You cannot really like providing option, because no one wants to know options. I want an answer. I want a gesture. I want you support this. You don't support this. You like him. You don't like him. I mean, it's like a kind of. So everyone is so exciting. Every time we need to have a climax. We need to have a climax every time. Million like, and then we are searching for. We are searching for a climax after a climax, like Avengers. Not one superhero is not enough. We have to have 20. So yeah, this is a non. What I would like to end is, I think this pandemic thing is good because it gives a chance for us to reflect. But if we lose this chance to reflect and do something more solid to change, and I think Asian culture actually provide a lot of options or inspiration. I think if you look at you look at the meditation app, it's already an Eastern concept, But then how we could make this as part of our living, not just a de-stress or detox, Sometimes people drink a lot and they go detox, How we change the way, how we live, how we consume, how we relate to each other. That's, I think, it's more fundamentals.
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you, Matthias. I think Matthias, it's interesting what you mentioned. This whole pandemic is a good thing. It gives us a chance to reset. I think that was one of the words that have cropped up between the both of you, to reset and to rethink. And it seems one key thing that the both of you have been talking about is actually really a question of, as you mentioned, Matthias, the idea of the meditation app, in other words, about mindfulness. The fact that we have got to, suddenly things come, the world that we know has suddenly come to a stop in the way we know it through technology. It's actually made us to reflect and to rethink. And what you talked about the body, about the way we breathe and the way we sit and the way we think, actually is, we are recalibrating or renegotiating the way we encounter the world. And it's interesting what you've mentioned, the idea of Asian traditions and Asian practices, which a lot of it in there is perhaps it opens up or makes us revisit the world, what Asian practices and traditions can offer us. And I think I think both of you are agreeable on so many different on many points and you have brought up so many similarities. And one thing I think is interesting, thinking of from this whole dialogue, then would be how both, Singapore and Hong Kong, and both your some viewpoints are so similar, and the differences, I think, as you mentioned, the good thing about differences is it allows for negotiation and discussions and create something new, which I think is very important. So hopefully, I don't know, I think this is the first time, we all engage in a dialogue in this way, something can grow up from this dialogue, and it just doesn't end here, that perhaps we can reconnect offline with one another and explore possibilities in which we can work together, whether online or physical, when it matters. As Matthias you said, we may be traveling less, but that doesn't mean we cannot communicate more. Okay, I think it's we've almost come to the end of the session. I think first of all, I want to thank the people who have listened in on this session. We've actually had people from the United States listening in, also people from Hong Kong, and they've really enjoyed the session. So for all of you, those of you who have been listening to this, ironically, we cannot see you physically or in presence, but we want to thank you very, very much for it. Thank you for all the questions that have been raised. The additional comments have been that it's encouraging that in Singapore, the Esplanade is building a medium-sized theater, and we hope the project will go on. And also, we should have another session on art therapy. So perhaps we can have another session on art therapy in Singapore and, and in Hong Kong together. I think the perspective has been great. So I think we have to come to a close, and I don't want to hold people up, but thank you, Matthias. Thank you for your time coming from Hong Kong. And thank you, Audrey, for the sharing. It's been really great listening to you. I'm familiar with Audrey, and it's always inspiring to listen to her. Listening to you for the first time, Matthias, I hope we can engage more with you in Singapore, and we have more sessions like this. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, and also to the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office in Singapore for supporting this. So I think Matthias and Audrey, would you have any final words before we round off? Any final words you'd like to share?
Well, okay. Yeah, if I may, I think the question of consumption has also come up. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has also shown us is how much we consume, right? And we all know that overconsumption also affects the planet that we live on. And then remember, it's the only planet we're living on. This is our only habitat. We damage that, that's the end of human civilization as we know it. So I think the pandemic has given us this opportunity to really reflect on these really big and existential questions. How do we live moving forward? And I hope that, more people will bear that in mind. And then accordingly, when you start to make those changes in your lives, maybe then things will start to move in a different direction.
Okay, thank you, Andre. Yeah, the idea of consumerism, which both of you have brought up. Matthias, would you like to close off with any words?
Thank you. I hope this is the beginning of more communication and then maybe collaboration in the future. And also, I thank you, the Hong Kong ETO, and for their support. I think they should do more, to facilitate that. And we are willing to support and generate more opportunity for younger generation from Singapore and Hong Kong.
Okay, thank you, Matthias and Audrey. So Matthias and Audrey, I think I'll connect with you all offline separately, and we'll carry on this conversation further. And I think it's about bridging borders in a way, despite that we can't travel. Thank you very much.
Thank
Have
you.
a great
Bye.
day ahead. Thank you. Bye-bye.